Chapter 40. The Venerable Lady. She attends a second banquet in the garden of Broad Vista. Qin Yüan-yang 3 times promulgates, by means of dominoes, the order to quote passages from old writers. As soon as Baoyu, we will now explain, heard what the lad told him, he rushed with eagerness inside. When he came to look about him, he discovered Hu Po standing in front of the screen. "Be quick and go," she urged. "They're waiting to speak to you." Baoyu wended his way into the drawing rooms. Here he found Dowager Lady Chia, consulting with Madame Wang and the whole body of young ladies about the return feast to be given to Shih. "I've got a plan to suggest," he consequently interposed. "As there are to be no outside guests, the eatables too should not be limited to any kind or number. A few of such dishes as have ever been to the liking of any of us should be fixed upon and prepared for the occasion. Neither should any banquet be spread, but a high teapot can be placed in front of each, with 1 or 2 things to suit our particular tastes. Besides, a painted box with partitions and a decanter. Won't this be an original way?" "Capital!" shouted old Lady Chia. "Go and tell the people in the cookhouse," she forthwith ordered a servant, "to get ready tomorrow such dishes as we relish, and to put them in as many boxes as there will be people and bring them over. We can have breakfast too in the garden." But while they were deliberating, the time came to light the lamps. Nothing of any note transpired the whole night. The next day, they got up at early dawn. The weather, fortunately, was beautifully clear. Li Wan turned out of bed at daybreak. She was engaged in watching the old matrons and servant girls sweeping the fallen leaves, rubbing the tables and chairs, and preparing the tea and wine vessels, when she perceived Feng He usher in old goody Liu and Pan He. "You're very busy, our senior lady," they said. "I told you that you wouldn't manage to start yesterday." Li Wan smiled. "But you were in a hurry to get away." "You're worthy, old lady," goody Liu replied laughingly. "Wouldn't let me go. She wanted me to enjoy myself too for a day before I went." Feng He then produced several large and small keys. "Our mistress Lin says," she remarked, "that she fears that the high teapots which are out are not enough, and she thinks it would be as well to open the loft and take out those that are put away and use them for a day. Our lady should really have come and seen to it in person, but as she has something to tell Madame Wang, she begs your ladyship to open the place, and get a few servants to bring them out." Li Wan there and then told Su Yun to take the keys. She also bade a matron go out and call a few servant boys from those on duty at the second gate. When they came, Li Wan remained in the lower story of the Taquan loft, and looking up, she ordered the servants to go and open the Chochin hall and to bring the teapots one by one. The young servant lads, matrons, and servant maids then set to work in a body, and carried down over 20 of them. "Be careful with them," shouted Li Wan. "Don't be bustling about just as if you were being pursued by ghosts. Mind you don't break the tenons." Turning her head round, "Old dame," she observed, addressing herself smilingly to goody Liu, "go upstairs too and have a look." Old goody Liu was longing to satisfy her curiosity, so at the bare mention of the permission, she uttered just one word, "Come," and, dragging Pan along, she trudged up the stairs. On her arrival inside, she espied, pile upon pile, a whole heap of screens, tables and chairs, painted lanterns of different sizes, and other similar articles. She could not, it is true, make out the use of the various things, but at the sight of so many colors, of such finery and of the unusual beauty of each article, she muttered time after time the name of Buddha, and then forthwith wended her way downstairs. Subsequently, the servants locked the doors, and every one of them came down. "I fancy," cried Li Wan, "that our dowager lady will feel disposed to go on the water. So you'd better also get the poles, oars, and awnings for the boats, and keep them in readiness." The servants expressed their obedience. Once more they unlocked the doors, and carried down everything required. She then bade a lad notify the boatwomen go to the dock and punt out 2 boats. But while all this bustle was going on, they discovered that Dowager Lady Chia had already arrived at the head of a whole company of people. Li Wan promptly went up to greet them. "Dear venerable senior," she smiled, "you must be in good spirits to have come in here. Imagining that you hadn't as yet combed your hair, I just plucked a few chrysanthemums, meaning to send them to you." While she spoke, Baoyu at once presented to her a jadeite tray, of the size of a lotus leaf, containing twigs cut from every species of chrysanthemum. Old Lady Chia selected a cluster of deep red and pinned it in her hair about her temples. But turning round, she noticed old Goody Liu. "Come over here," she vehemently cried with a smile, "and put on a few flowers." Scarcely was this remark concluded, then Lady Feng dragged Goody Liu forward. "Let me deck you up," she laughed. With these words, she seized a whole plateful of flowers and stuck them 3 this way, 4 that way, all over her head. Old Lady Chia and the whole party were greatly amused. So much so that they could not check themselves. "I wonder," shouted Goody Liu smiling, "what blessings I have brought upon my head that such honors are conferred upon it today." "Don't you yet pull them away," they all laughed, and chucked them in her face. "She has got you up in such a way as to make a regular old elf of you." "I'm an old hag, I admit," Goody Liu pursued with a laugh. "But when I was young, I too was pretty and fond of flowers and powder. But the best thing I can do now is to keep to such fineries as befit my advanced age." While they bandied words, they reached the Xingfang pavilion. The waiting maids brought a large embroidered rug and spread it over the planks of the divan near the balustrade. On this rug Dowager Lady Chia sat, with her back leaning against the railing, and inviting Goody Liu to also take a seat next to her. "Is this garden nice or not?" she asked her. Old Goody Liu invoked Buddha several times. "We country people," she rejoined, "do invariably come at the close of each year into the city and buy pictures and stick them about. And frequently do we find ourselves in our leisure moments wondering how we too could manage to get into the pictures and walk about the scenes they represent. I presume that those pictures were purely and simply fictitious, for how could there be any such places in reality? But, contrary to my expectations, I found, as soon as I entered this garden today and had a look about it, that it was, after all, 100 times better than these very pictures. But if only I could get someone to make me a sketch of this garden, to take home with me and let them see it, so that when we die we may have reaped some benefit." Upon catching the wish she expressed, Dowager Lady Chia pointed at Shih. "Look at that young granddaughter of mine," she smiled. "She's got the knack of drawing. So, what do you say to my asking her tomorrow to make a picture for you?" This suggestion filled Goody Liu with enthusiasm, and speedily crossing over, she clasped Shih in her arms. "My dear miss!" she cried. "So young in years and yet so pretty and so accomplished too. Mightn't you be a spirit come to life?" After old Lady Chia had had a little rest, she in person took Goody Liu and showed her everything there was to be seen. First they visited the Shaoxian Lodge. The moment they stepped into the entrance, a narrow avenue, flanked on either side with kingfisher-like green bamboos, met their gaze. The earth below was turfed all over with moss. In the center extended a tortuous road, paved with pebbles. Goody Liu left Dowager Lady Chia and the party walk on the raised road, while she herself stepped on the earth. But Hu Po tugged at her. "Come up, old dame, and walk here," she exclaimed. "Mind the fresh moss is slippery and you might fall." "I don't mind it," answered Goody Liu. "We people are accustomed to walking on such slippery things. So young ladies, please proceed. And do look after your embroidered shoes. Don't splash them with mud." But while bent upon talking with those who kept on the raised road, she unawares reached a spot, which was actually slippery, and with a sound of coo-tang, she tumbled over. The whole company clapped their hands and laughed boisterously. "You young wenches," shouted out Dowager Lady Chia. "Don't you yet raise her up, but stand by giggling?" This reprimand was still being uttered when Goody Liu had already crawled up. She too was highly amused. "Just as my mouth was bragging," she observed, "I got a whack on the lips." "Have you perchance twisted your waist?" inquired old Lady Chia. "Tell the servant girls to pat it for you." "What an idea!" retorted Goody Liu. "Am I so delicate? What day ever goes by without my tumbling down a couple of times? And if I had to be patted every time, wouldn't it be dreadful?" Chu Chuan had at an early period raised the speckled bamboo portiere. Dowager Lady Chia and her companions entered and seated themselves. Daiyu with her own hands took a small tray and came to present a covered cup of tea to her grandmother. "We won't have any tea," Madame Wang interposed. "So, miss, you needn't pour any." Daiyu. Hearing this, bade a waiting maid fetch the chair from under the window where she herself often sat, and moving it to the lower side, she pressed Madame Wang into it. But Goody Liu caught sight of the pencils and ink slabs lying on the table placed next to the window, and espied the bookcase piled up to the utmost with books. "This must surely," the old dame ejaculated, "be some young gentleman's study." "This is the room of this granddaughter-in-law of mine," Dowager Lady Chia explained, smilingly pointing to Daiyu. Goody Liu scrutinized Daiyu with intentness for a while. "Is this anything like a young lady's private room?" She then observed with a smile. "Why, in very deed, it's superior to any first-class library." "How is it I don't see Baoyu?" His grandmother Chia went on to inquire. "He's in the boat, on the pond," the waiting maids with one voice returned for answer. "Who also got the boats ready?" Old Lady Chia asked. "The loft was open just now, so they were taken out," Li Wan said. "And as I thought that you might, venerable senior, feel inclined to have a row, I got everything ready." After listening to this explanation, Dowager Lady Chia was about to pass some remark, but someone came and reported to her that Mrs. Shih had arrived. No sooner had Old Lady Chia and the others sprung to their feet than they noticed that Mrs. Shih had already made her appearance. While taking a seat, "Your venerable ladyship," she smiled, "must be in capital spirits today to have come at this early hour. It's only this very minute that I propose that anyone who came late should be fined." Dowager Lady Chia laughed. "And who'd have thought it, hear you, Mrs. Shih, arrive late?" After they had indulged in good-humored raillery for a time, Old Lady Chia's attention was attracted by the faded color of the gauze on the windows, and she addressed herself to Madame Wang. "This gauze," she said, "may have been nice enough when it was newly pasted, but after a time nothing remained of kingfisher green. In this court too there are no peach or apricot trees, and these bamboos already are green in themselves. So were this shade of green gauze to be put up again, it would, instead of improving matters, not harmonize with the surroundings. I remember that we had at one time 4 or 5 kinds of colored gauzes for sticking on windows. So give her some tomorrow to change that on there. When I opened the store yesterday," hastily put in Lady Feng, "I noticed that there were still in those boxes made of large planks several rolls of cicada wing gauze of silvery red color. There were also several rolls with designs of twigs of flowers of every kind, several with the rolling clouds and bats pattern, and several with figures representing hundreds of butterflies, interspersed among flowers. The colors of all these were fresh, and the gauze supple, but I failed to see anything of the kind you speak of. Were 2 rolls taken, from those I referred to, and a couple of bed covers of embroidered gauze made out of them, they would, I fancy, be a pretty sight." "Pshaw!" laughed Old Lady Chia. "Everyone says that there's nothing you haven't gone through and nothing you haven't seen, and don't you even know what this gauze is? Will you again brag by and by after this?" Mrs. Shih and all the others smiled. "She may have gone through a good deal," they remarked. "But how can she ever presume to pit herself against an old lady like you? So why don't you, venerable senior, tell her what it is so that we too may be edified?" Lady Feng too gave a smile. "My dear ancestor," she pleaded, "do tell me what it is like." Dowager Lady Chia thereupon proceeded to enlighten Mrs. Shih and the whole company. "That gauze is older in years than any one of you," she said. "It isn't therefore to be wondered if you make a mistake and take it for cicada wing gauze. But it really bears some resemblance to it. So much so, indeed, that anyone not knowing the difference would imagine it to be the cicada wing gauze. Its true name, however, is soft smoke silk. This is also a nice sounding name," Lady Feng agreed. "But up to the age I've reached, I have never heard of any such designation. In spite of the many hundreds of specimens of gauzes and silks I've seen." "How long can you have lived?" Old Lady Chia added smilingly. "And how many kinds of things can you have met that you indulge in this tall talk? Of this soft smoke silk, there only exist 4 kinds of colors. The one is red-blue, the other is russet, the other pine green, the other silvery red. And it's because, when made into curtains or stuck on window frames, it looks from far like smoke or mist, that it is called soft smoke silk. The silvery red is also called russet shadow gauze. Among the gauzes used in the present day, in the palace above, there are none so supple and rich, light and closely woven as this. Not to speak of that girl Feng not having seen it. Mrs. Shih laughed. Why, even I have never so much as heard anything of it. While the conversation proceeded in this strain, Lady Feng soon directed a servant to fetch a roll. Now isn't this the kind? Dowager Lady Chia exclaimed. At first, we simply had it stuck on the window frames, but we subsequently used it for covers and curtains, just for a trial, and really they were splendid. So you had better tomorrow try and find several rolls, and take some of the silvery red one and have it fixed on the windows for her. While Lady Feng promised to attend to her commission, the party scrutinized it, and unanimously extolled it with effusion. Old Goody Lu too strained her eyes and examined it, and her lips incessantly muttered Buddha's name. We couldn't, she ventured, afford to make clothes of such stuff, much though we may long to do so. And won't it be a pity to use it for sticking on windows? But it doesn't, after all, look well when made into clothes, old Lady Chia explained. Lady Feng hastily pulled out the lapel of the deep red brocaded gauze jacket she had on, and facing Dowager Lady Chia and Mrs. Shih, Look at this jacket of mine, she remarked. This is also a first-rate quality. Old Lady Chia and Mrs. Shih rejoined. This is nowadays made in the palace for imperial use, but it can't possibly come up to this. It's such thin stuff, Lady Feng observed. And do you still say that it was made in the palace for imperial use? Why, it doesn't, in fact, compare favorably with even this which is worn by officials. You'd better search again, old Lady Chia urged. I believe there must be more of it. If there be, bring it all out, and give this old relative Liu a couple of rolls. Should there be any red-blue, I'll make a curtain to hang up. What remains can be matched with some lining and cut into a few double waistcoats for the waiting maids to wear. It would be sheer waste to keep these things, as they will be spoilt by the damp. Lady Feng vehemently acquiesced. After which, she told a servant to take the gauze away. These rooms are so small, Dowager Lady Chia then observed, smiling. We had better go elsewhere for a stroll. Everyone says, old Goody Lu put in, that big people live in big houses. When I saw yesterday your main apartments, Dowager Lady, with all those large boxes, immense presses, big tables, and spacious beds to match, they did, indeed, present an imposing sight. Those presses are larger than our whole house, yea, loftier too. But strange to say, there were ladders in the back court. They don't also, I thought, go up to the housetops to sun things. So what can they keep those ladders in readiness for? Well, after that, I remembered that they must be required for opening the presses to take out or put in things. And that without those ladders, how could one ever reach that height? But now that I've also seen these small rooms, more luxuriously got up than the large ones and full of various articles, all so fascinating and hardly even known to me by name, I feel, the more I feast my eyes on them, the more unable to tear myself away from them. There are other things still better than this, Lady Feng added. I'll take you to see them all. Saying this, they straightway left the Shaoxiang lodge. From a distance, they spied a whole crowd of people punting the boats in the lake. As they've got the boats ready, old Lady Chia proposed, we may as well go and have a row in them. As she uttered this suggestion, they wended their steps along the persicary-covered bank of the Purple Lily Isle. But before reaching the lake, they perceived several matrons advancing that way with large multicolored boxes in their hands, made all alike of twisted wire and inlaid with gold. Lady Feng hastened to inquire of Madame Wang where breakfast was to be served. Ask our venerable senior, Madame Wang replied, and let them lay it wherever she pleases. Old Lady Chia overheard her answer, and turning her head round. Miss Tersha, she said, take the servants, and make them lay breakfast wherever you think best. We'll get into the boats from here. Upon catching her senior's wishes, Lady Feng retraced her footsteps, and accompanied by Lai Wan, Tan Chun, Yüan-yang, and Hu Po, she led off the servants, carrying the eatables and other domestics, and came by the nearest way to the Chu Shuang Library, where they arrange the tables in the Cao Xueqin hall. We daily say that whenever the gentlemen outside have anything to drink or eat, they invariably have someone who can raise a laugh and whom they can chaff for fun's sake. Yüan-yang smiled. So let's also today get a female family companion. Li Wan, being a person full of kindly feelings, did not fathom the insinuation, though it did not escape her ear. Lady Feng, however, thoroughly understood that she alluded to old goody Liu. Let us two today, she smilingly remarked, chaff her for a bit of fun. These two then began to mature their plans. Li Wan chided them with a smile. You people, she said, don't know even how to perform the least good act. But you're not small children anymore, and are you still up to these pranks? Mind, our venerable ancestor might call you to task. That has nothing whatever to do with you, senior lady. Yüan-yang laughed. It's my own lookout. These words were still on her lips when she saw Dowager Lady Chia and the rest of the company arrive. They each sat where and how they pleased. First and foremost, a waiting maid brought 2 trays of tea. After tea, Lady Feng laid hold of a napkin, made of foreign cloth, in which were wrapped a handful of blackwood chopsticks, encircled with 3 rings of inlaid silver, and distributed them on the tables, in the order in which they were placed. Bring that small hardwood table over, old Lady Chia then exclaimed, and let our relative Li sit next to me here. No sooner did the servants hear her order than they hurried to move the table to where she wanted it. Lady Feng, during this interval, made a sign with her eye to Yüan-yang. Yüan-yang there and then dragged goody Liu out of the hall and began to impress in a low tone of voice various things on her mind. This is the custom which prevails in our household, she proceeded, and if you disregard it we'll have a laugh at your expense. Having arranged everything she had in view, they at length returned to their places. Mrs. Shih had come over after her meal, so she simply seated herself on one side and sipped her tea. Dowager Lady Chia with Baoyu, Xiangyun, Daiyu and Bao-Chiau sat at one table. Madame Wang took the girls Ying-chun and her sisters and occupied one table. Old goody Liu took a seat at a table next to Dowager Lady Chia. Heretofore, while their old mistress had her repast, a young servant maid usually stood by her to hold the finger bowl, yak brush, napkin and other such necessaries. But Yüan-yang did not of late fulfill any of these duties, so when, on this occasion, she deliberately seized the yak brush and came over and flapped it about, the servant girls concluded that she was bent upon playing some tricks upon goody Liu, and they readily withdrew and let her have her way. While Yüan-yang attended to her self-imposed duties, she winked at the old dame. Miss, goody Liu exclaimed, set your mind at ease. Goody Liu sat down at the table and took up the chopsticks, but so heavy and clumsy did she find them that she could not handle them conveniently. The fact is that Lady Feng and Yüan-yang had put their heads together and decided to only assign to goody Liu a pair of antiquated 4-cornered ivory chopsticks, inlaid with gold. These forks, shouted goody Liu, after scrutinizing them, are heavier than the very iron lever over at my place. However can I move them about? This remark had the effect of making everyone explode into a fit of laughter. But a married woman standing in the center of the room, with a box in her hands, attracted their gaze. A waiting maid went up to her and removed the cover of the box. Its contents were 2 bowls of eatables. Li Wan took one of these and placed it on Dowager Lady Chia's table, while Lady Feng chose the bowl with pigeon's eggs and put it on goody Liu's table. Please, commence, Dowager Lady Chia uttered from the near side, where she sat. Goody Liu at this speedily sprung to her feet. Old Liu, she roared with a loud voice. Your eating capacity is as big as that of a buffalo. You've gorged like an old sow and can't raise your head up. Then puffing out her cheeks, she added not a word. The whole party was at first taken quite aback. But as soon as they heard the drift of her remarks, everyone, both high as well as low, began to laugh boisterously. Xiangyun found it so difficult to restrain herself that she spurted out the tea she had in her mouth. Lin Daiyu indulged in such laughter that she was quite out of breath, and propping herself up on the table, she kept on ejaculating, "Ai-yo." Baoyu rolled into his grandmother's lap. The old lady herself was so amused that she clasped Baoyu in her embrace and gave way to endearing epithets. Madame Wang laughed and pointed at Lady Feng with her finger. But as for saying a word, she could not. Mrs. Shih had much difficulty in curbing her mirth, and she sputtered the tea, with which her mouth was full, all over Tan Chun's petticoat. Tan Chun threw the contents of the teacup she held in her hand over Ying Chun, while Shi Chun quitted her seat and, pulling her nurse away, bade her rub her stomach for her. Below, among the lower seats, there was not one who was not with bent waist and doubled up back. Some retired to a corner and squatting down, laughed away. Others suppressed their laughter and came up and changed the clothes of their young mistresses. Lady Feng and Yüan-yang were the only ones who kept their countenance. Still they continued helping old Goody Liu to food. Old Goody Liu took up the chopsticks. Even the chickens in this place are fine, she went on to add, pretending she did not hear what was going on. The eggs they lay are small but so dainty. How very pretty they are. Let me help myself to one. For the company had just managed to check themselves, but the moment these words fell on their ears, they started again with their laughter. Old Lady Chia laughed to such an extent that tears streamed from her eyes. And so little could she bear the strain any longer that Hu Po stood behind her and patted her. This must be the work of that vixen Feng. Old Lady Chia laughed. She has ever been up to tricks like a very imp, so be quick and disbelieve all her yarns. Goody Liu was in the act of praising the eggs as small yet dainty, when Lady Feng interposed with a smile. They're one tael each. Be quick and taste them. She said, they're not nice when they get cold. Goody Liu forthwith stretched out the chopsticks with the intent of catching one. But how could she manage to do so? They rolled and rolled in the bowl for ever so long. And it was only after extreme difficulty that she succeeded in shoving one up. Extending her neck forward, she was about to put it in her mouth, when it slipped down again and rolled onto the floor. She hastily banged down the chopsticks and was going herself to pick it up, when a servant who stood below got hold of it and took it out of the room. Old Goody Liu heaved a sigh. A tail, she soliloquized, and here it goes without a sound. Everyone had long ago abandoned all idea of eating, and, gazing at her, they enjoyed the fun. Who has now brought out these chopsticks again? Old Lady Chia went on to ask. We haven't invited any strangers or spread any large banquet. It must be that vixen Feng who gave them out. But don't you yet change them? The servants, standing on the floor below, had indeed had no hand in getting those ivory chopsticks. They had, in fact, been brought by Lady Feng and Yüan-yang. But when they heard these remarks, they hurried to put them away and to change them for a pair similar to those used by the others, made of blackwood inlaid with silver. They've taken away the gold ones, old Goody Liu shouted, and here come silver ones. But, after all, they're not as handy as those we use. Should there be any poison in the viands, Lady Feng observed, you can detect it as soon as the silver is dipped into them. If there's poison in such viands as these, old Goody Liu added, why those of ours must be all arsenic. But though it be the death of me, I'll swallow every morsel. Seeing how amusing the old woman was, and with what relish she devoured her food, Dowager Lady Chia took her own dishes and passed them over to her. She then likewise bade an old matron take various viands and put them in a bowl for Pan-er. But presently, the repast was concluded, and old Lady Chia and all the other inmates joined into Tan Chun's bedroom for a chat. The remnants were, meanwhile, cleared away, and fresh tables were laid. Old Goody Liu watched Lei Wan and Lady Feng sit opposite each other and eat. Putting everything else aside, she sighed, what most takes my fancy is the way things are done in your mansion. It isn't to be wondered at that the adage has it that propriety originates from great families. Don't be too touchy. Lady Feng hastily smiled. We all made fun of you just now. But barely had she done speaking when Yüan-yang too walked in. Old Goody Liu, she said laughingly. Don't be angry. I tender you my apologies, venerable dame. What are you saying, miss? Old Goody Liu rejoined smiling. We've coaxed our dowager lady to get a little distraction. And what reason is there to be angry? From the very first moment you spoke to me, I knew at once that it was intended to afford merriment to you all. Had I been angry at heart, I wouldn't have gone so far as to say what I did. Yüan-yang then blew up the servants. Why, she shouted. Don't you pour a cup of tea for the old dame? That's sister-in-law, promptly explained old goody Liu. Gave me a cup a little while back. I've had it already. But you, miss, must also have something to eat. Lady Feng dragged Yüan-yang into a seat. Have your meal with us, she said. You'll thus save another fuss by and by. Yüan-yang readily seated herself. The matrons came up and added to the number of bowls and chopsticks, and the trio went through their meal. From all I see, smiled goody Liu, you people eat just a little and finish. It's lucky you don't feel the pangs of hunger. But it isn't astonishing if a whiff of wind can puff you over. A good many eatables remained over today. Where are they all gone to? Yüan-yang inquired. They haven't as yet been apportioned, the matrons responded. They're kept in here until they can be given in a lump to them to eat. They can't get through so many things, Yüan-yang resumed. You had as well therefore choose 2 bowls and send them over to that girl Peng, in your mistress Secundus' rooms. She has had her repast long ago, Lady Feng put in. There's no need to give her any. With what she can't eat herself, Yüan-yang continued. She can feed the cats. At these words, a matron lost no time in selecting 2 sorts of eatables, and, taking the box, she went to take them over. Where's Su-yong gone to? Yüan-yang asked. They're all in here having their meal together, Li Wan replied. What do you want her for again? Well, in that case, never mind, Yüan-yang answered. Shih isn't here, Lady Feng observed, so tell someone to take her a few things. Yüan-yang, hearing this, directed a servant to send her also a few eatables. Have the partition boxes been filled with wine for by and by? Yüan-yang went on to ask the matrons. They'll be ready, I think, in a little while, a matron explained. Hurry them up a bit, Yüan-yang added. The matron signified her assent. Lady Feng and her friends then came into Tan Chun's apartments, where they found the ladies chatting and laughing. Tan Chun had ever shown an inclination for plenty of room. Hence that suite of 3 apartments had never been partitioned. In the center was placed a large table of rosewood and Tylee marble. On this table were laid in a heap every kind of copy slips written by persons of note. Several tens of valuable ink slabs and various specimens of tubes and receptacles for pens figured also about. The pens in which were as thickly packed as trees in a forest. On the offside stood a flower bowl from the Rue Kill, as large as a bushel measure. In it was placed, till it was quite full, a bunch of white chrysanthemums, in appearance like crystal balls. In the middle of the west wall was suspended a large picture representing vapor and rain. The handiwork of Minang Yang. On the left and right of this picture was hung a pair of antithetical scrolls, the autograph of Yenmo. The lines on these scrolls were, wild scenes are to the taste of those who leisure love, and springs and rookeries are their rustic resort. On the table figured a large tripod. On the left stood on a blackwood cabinet a huge bowl from a renowned government kill. This bowl contained about 10 Buddha's hands of beautiful yellow and fine proportions. On the right was suspended on a Japanese lacquered frame, a white jade sonorous plate. Its shape resembled 2 eyes, one by the side of the other. Next to it hung a small hammer. Pan He had become a little more confident and was about to seize the hammer and beat the plate, when the waiting maids hastened to prevent him. Next, he wanted a Buddha's hand to eat. Tan Chun chose one and let him have it. You may play with it, she said, but you can't eat it. On the east side stood a sleeping divan. On a movable bed was hung a leek green gauze curtain, ornamented with double embroideries, representing flowers, plants, and insects. Pan ran up to have a look. This is a green cicada, he shouted. This a grasshopper. But old Goody Liu promptly gave him a slap. You mean scamp, she cried. What an awful rumpus you're kicking up. I simply brought you along with me to look at things. And lo, you put on airs. And she beat Pan until he burst out crying. It was only after everyone quickly combined in using their efforts to solace him that he at length desisted. Old Lady Chia then looked through the gauze casement into the back court for some time. The dryandra trees by the eaves of the covered passage are growing all right, she remarked. The only thing is that their foliage is rather sparse. But while she passed this remark, A sudden gust of wind swept by, and faintly on her ear fell the strains of music. "In whose house is there a wedding?" old lady Chia inquired. "This place must be very near the street." "How could one hear what's going on in the street?" Madame Wang and the others smiled. "It's our 12 girls practicing on their wind and string instruments." As they're practicing, Dowager Lady Chia eagerly cried, smilingly, "Why not ask them to come in here and practice? They'll be able to have a stroll also, while we on our part will derive some enjoyment." Upon hearing this suggestion, Lady Feng immediately directed a servant to go out and call them in. She further issued orders to bring a table and spread a red cover over it. "Let it be put," old lady Chia chimed in the water pavilion of the Lotus Fragrance Arbor. "For the music will borrow the ripple of the stream and sound ever so much more pleasant to the ear. We can by and by drink our wine in the Cho Chin Hall. We'll thus have ample room and be able to listen from close." Everyone admitted that the spot was well adapted. Dowager Lady Chia turned herself towards Mrs. Shih. "Let's get ahead." She laughed. "The young ladies don't like anyone to come in here, for fear lest their quarters should get contaminated. So don't let us show ourselves disregardful of their wishes. The right thing would be to go and have our wine aboard one of those boats." As she spoke, one and all rose to their feet. They were making their way out when Tan Xian interposed. "What's this that you're saying?" She smiled. "Please do seat yourselves, Venerable Senior, and you, Mrs. Shih and Madame Wang. You can't be going yet. These 3 girls of mine are really nice. There are only 2 mistresses that are simply dreadful," Dowager Lady Chia said smilingly. "When we get drunk shortly, we'll go and sit in their rooms and have a lark." These words evoked laughter from everyone. In a body they quitted the place. But they had not proceeded far before they reached the bank covered with aquatic plants, to which place the boatwomen, who had been brought from Kasu, had already punted 2 crabwood boats. Into one of these boats, they helped old lady Chia, Madame Wang, Mrs. Shih, old goody Lu, Yüan-yang, and Yuan-er. Last in order, Li Wan followed on board. But Lady Feng too stepped in, and standing up on the bow, she insisted upon punting. Dowager Lady Chia, however, remonstrated from her seat in the bottom of the boat. "This isn't a joke," she cried. "We're not on the river, it's true, but there are some very deep places about, so be quick and come in. Do it for my sake. What's there to be afraid of?" Lady Feng laughed. "Compose your mind, worthy ancestor." Saying this, the boat was pushed off with one shove. When it reached the middle of the lake, Lady Feng became nervous, for the craft was small and the occupants many, and hastily handing the pole to a boatwoman, she squatted down at last. Ying Chun, her sisters, their cousins, as well as Baoyu subsequently got on board the second boat and followed in their track, while the rest of the company, consisting of old nurses and a bevy of waiting maids, kept pace with them along the bank of the stream. "All these broken lotus leaves are dreadful," Baoyu shouted. "Why don't you yet tell the servants to pull them off?" "When was this garden left quiet during all the days of this year?" Baoyu smiled. "Why, people have come day after day to visit it, so was there ever any time to tell the servants to come and clean it?" "I have the greatest abhorrence," Lin Taiyu chimed in, "for Li Ai's poetical works, but there's only this line in them which I like. Leave the dry lotus leaves so as to hear the patter of the rain. And hear you people deliberately. Mean again not to leave the dry lotus stay where they are. This is indeed a fine line," Baoyu exclaimed. "We mustn't hereafter let them pull them away." While this conversation continued, they reached the Joly inlet under the flower-laden beach. They felt a coolness from the shady overgrowth penetrate their very bones. The decaying vegetation and the withered aquatic chestnut plants on the sandbank enhanced, to a greater degree, the beauty of the autumn scenery. Dowager Lady Chia at this point observed some spotless rooms on the bank, so spick and so span. "Are not these Miss Shua's quarters?" she asked. "Eh? Yes, they are," everybody answered. Old Lady Chia promptly bade them go alongside, and wending their way up the marble steps, which seemed to lead to the clouds, they in a body entered the Heng Wu court. Here they felt a peculiar perfume come wafting into their nostrils. For the colder the season got, the greener grew that strange vegetation and those fairy-like creepers. The various plants were laden with seeds, which closely resembled red coral beans, as they drooped in lovely clusters. The house, as soon as they put their foot into it, presented the aspect of a snow cave. There was a total absence of every object of ornament. On the table figured merely an earthenware vase, in which were placed several chrysanthemums. A few books and teacups were also conspicuous, but no further knickknacks. On the bed was suspended a green gauze curtain, and of equally extreme plainness were the coverlets and mattresses belonging to it. "This child," Dowager Lady Chia sighed, "is too simple. If you've got nothing to lay about, why not ask your aunt for a few articles? I would never raise any objection. I never thought about them. Your things, of course, have been left at home, and have not been brought over." So saying, she told Yüan-yang to go and fetch several bric-a-brac. She next went on to call Lady Feng to task. She herself wouldn't have them, Lady Feng rejoined. "We really sent over a few, but she refused every one of them and returned them." "In her home also," smiled Mrs. Shih. "She does not go in very much for such sort of things." Old Lady Chia nodded her head. "It will never do," she added. "It does, it's true, save trouble. But were some relative to come on a visit, she find things in an impossible way. In the second place, such simplicity in the apartments of young ladies of tender age is quite unpropitious. Why, if you young people go on in this way, we old fogies should go further and live in stables. You've all heard what is said in those books and plays about the dreadful luxury with which young ladies' quarters are got up. And though these girls of ours could not presume to place themselves on the same footing as those young ladies, they shouldn't nevertheless exceed too much the bounds of what constitutes the right thing. If they have any objects ready at hand, why shouldn't they lay them out? And if they have any strong predilection for simplicity, a few things less will do quite as well. I've always had the greatest knack for titifying a room, but being an old woman now, I haven't the ease and inclination to attend to such things. These girls are, however, learning how to do things very nicely. I was afraid that there would be an appearance of vulgarity in what they did, and that, even had they anything worth having, they'd so place them about as to spoil them. But from what I can see, there's nothing vulgar about them. But let me now put things right for you, and I'll wager that everything will look grand as well as plain. I've got a couple of my own knickknacks, which I've managed to keep to this day by not allowing Baoyu to get a glimpse of them. For had he ever seen them, they too would have long ago disappeared." Continuing, she called Yüan-yang. "Fetch that marble pot with scenery on it," she said to her. "That gauze screen and that tripod of transparent stone with black streaks, which you'll find in there, and lay out all three on this table. They'll be ample. Bring likewise those ink pictures and white silk curtains, and change these curtains." Yüan-yang expressed her obedience. "All these articles have been put away in the eastern loft," she smiled. "In what boxes they've been put I couldn't tell. I must therefore go and find them quietly, and if I bring them over tomorrow, it will be time enough. Tomorrow or the day after will do very well. But don't forget, that's all," Dowager Lady Chia urged. While conversing, they sat for a while. Presently, they left the rooms and repaired straightway into the Cho-Chen Hall. Wen Quan and the other girls came up and paid their obeisance. They next inquired what songs they were to practice. "You'd better choose a few pieces to rehearse out of those you know best," old Lady Chia rejoined. Wen Quan and her companions then withdrew and betook themselves to the Lotus Fragrance Pavilion. But we will leave them there without further allusion to them. During this while, Lady Feng had already, with the help of servants, got everything in perfect order. On the left and right of the side of honor were placed 2 divans. These divans were completely covered with embroidered covers and fine variegated mats. In front of each divan stood 2 lacquer teapoys, inlaid, some with designs of crabapple flowers, others of plum blossom, some of lotus leaves, others of sunflowers. Some of these teapoys were square, others round. Their shapes were all different. On each was placed a set consisting of a stove and a bottle, also a box with partitions. The 2 divans and 4 teapoys in the place of honor were used by Dowager Lady Chia and Mrs. Shih. The chair and 2 teapoys in the next best place, by Madame Wang. The rest of the inmates had, all alike, a chair and a teapoy. On the east side sat old Goody Liu. Below old Goody Liu came Madame Wang. On the west was seated Shih. The second place was occupied by Bao-Chiau, the third by Daiyu, the fourth by Ying-chun. Tan-chun and Shi-chun filled the lower seats in their proper order. Baoyu sat in the last place. The two teapoys assigned to Li Wan and Lady Feng stood within the third line of railings, and beyond the second row of gauze frames. The pattern of the partition boxes corresponded likewise with the pattern on the teapoys. Each inmate had a black decanter, with silver, inlaid in foreign designs, as well as an ornamented, enameled cup. After they had all occupied the seats assigned to them, Dowager Lady Chia took the initiative and smilingly suggested, "Let's begin by drinking a couple of cups of wine. But we should also have a game of forfeits today. We'll have plenty of fun then. You, venerable senior, must certainly have a good wine order to impose," Mrs. Xu laughingly observed, "but how could we ever comply with it? But if your aim be to intoxicate us, why, we'll all straightway drink 1 or 2 cups more than is good for us and finish." Here's Mrs. Xu beginning to be modest again today. Old Lady Chia smiled. "But I expect it's because she looks down upon me as being an old hag." "It isn't modesty," Mrs. Xu replied smiling. "It's all a dread lest I shouldn't be able to observe the order and thus incur ridicule." "If you don't give the right answer," Madame Wang promptly interposed with a smile, "you'll only have to drink a cup or 2 more of wine. And should we get drunk, we can go to sleep. And who'll, pray, laugh at us?" Mrs. Xu nodded her head. "I'll agree to the order," she laughed. "But dear senior, you must after all do the right thing and have a cup of wine to start it. This is quite natural." Old Lady Chia answered laughingly. And with these words, she forthwith emptied a cup. Lady Feng with hurried steps advanced to the center of the room. "If we are to play at forfeits," she smilingly proposed, "we'd better invite Sister Yüan-yang to come and join us." The whole company was perfectly aware that if Dowager Lady Chia had to give out the rule of forfeits, Yüan-yang would necessarily have to suggest it, so the moment they heard the proposal they, with common consent, approved it as excellent. Lady Feng therefore there and then dragged Yüan-yang over. "As you're to take a part in the game of forfeits," Madame Wang smilingly observed, "there's no reason why you should stand up." And turning her head round, "Bring over," she bade a young waiting maid, "a chair and place it at your Mistress Secunda's table." Yüan-yang, half refusing and half assenting, expressed her thanks, and took the seat. After partaking also of a cup of wine, "Drinking rules," she smiled, "resemble very much martial law. So irrespective of high or low, I alone will preside. Anyone therefore who disobeys my words will have to suffer a penalty." "Of course it should be so." Madame Wang and the others laughed. "So be quick and give out the rule." But before Yüan-yang had as yet opened her lips to speak, old goody Liu left the table and waving her hand. "Don't," she said, "make fun of people in this way, for I'll go home. This will never do," one and all smilingly protested. Yüan-yang shouted to the young waiting maids to drag her back to her table. And the maids, while also indulging in laughter, actually pulled her and compelled her to rejoin the banquet. "Spare me!" Old goody Liu kept on crying. "Spare me. Anyone who says 1 word more," Yüan-yang exclaimed, "will be fined a whole decanter full." Old goody Liu then at length observed silence. "I'll now give out the set of dominoes," Yüan-yang proceeded. "I'll begin from our venerable mistress and follow down in proper order until I come to old goody Liu, and I shall stop. So as to illustrate what I meant just now by giving out a set, I'll take these 3 dominoes and place them apart. You have to begin by saying something on the first, next to allude to the second, and after finishing with all 3, to take the name of the whole set and match it with a line, no matter whether it be from some stanza or roundelay, song or idyll, set phrases or proverbs, but they must rhyme. And anyone making a mistake will be mulcted in 1 cup. This rule is splendid. Begin at once," they all exclaimed. "I've got a set," Yüan-yang pursued. "On the left is the piece heaven, 12 dots. Above head stretches the blue heaven," Dowager Lady Chia said. "Good," shouted everyone. "In the center is a 5 and 6, Yüan-yang resumed. "The fragrance of the plum blossom pierces the bones on the bridge, 6, Old Lady Chia added. "There now remains," Yüan-yang explained, One piece, the 6 and 1. From among the fleecy clouds issues the wheel-like russet sun. Dowager Lady Chia continued. The whole combined, Yüan-yang observed, forms the devil with disheveled hair. This devil clasps the leg of the Jungpa devil, old Lady Chia observed. At the conclusion of her recitation, they all burst out laughing. Capital! They shouted. Old Lady Chia drained a cup. Yüan-yang then went on to remark, I've got another set. The one on the left is a double 5. Bud after bud of the plum bloom dances in the wind, Mrs. Shih replied. The one on the right is a 10 spot, Yüan-yang pursued. In the 10th moon, the plum bloom on the hills emits its fragrant smell, Mrs. Shih added. The middle piece is the 2 and 5, making the unlike 7, Yüan-yang observed. The spinning damsel star meets the cowherd on the eve of the 7th day of the 7th moon, Miss Shih said. Together they form. Erhang strolls on the 5 mounds, Yüan-yang continued. Mortals cannot be happy as immortals, Mrs. Shih rejoined. Her answers over, the whole company extolled them and had a drink. I've got another set, Yüan-yang once more exclaimed. On the left are distinctly the distant dots of the double ace. Both sun and moon are so suspended as to shine on heaven and earth, Xiangyun ventured. On the right are a couple of spots far apart which clearly form a 1 and 1, Yüan-yang pursued. What time a lonesome flower falls to the ground, no sound is audible, Xiangyun rejoined. In the middle, there is the 1 and 4, Yüan-yang added. The red apricot tree is planted by the sun and leans against the clouds, Xiangyun answered. Together they form the cherry fruit ripens for the 9th time, Yüan-yang said. In the imperial garden it is pecked by birds, Xiangyun replied. When she had done with her part, she drank a cup of wine. I've got another set, Yüan-yang began. The one on the left is a double 3. The swallows, pair by pair, chatter on the beams, Bao-Chiau remarked. The right piece is a 6, Yüan-yang added. The marsh flower is stretched by the breeze into the length of a green sash, Bao-Chiau returned. The centerpiece is a 3 and 6, making a 9 spot, Yüan-yang pursued. The 3 hills tower half beyond the azure skies, Bao-Chiau rejoined. Lumped together they form a chain-bound solitary boat, Yüan-yang resumed. Where there are wind and waves, there I feel sad, Bao-Chiau answered. When she had finished her turn and drained her cup, Yüan-yang went on again. On the left, she said, there's a heaven. A morning fine and beauteous scenery, but, alas, what a day for me, Daiyu replied. When this line fell on Bao-Chiau's ear, she turned her head round and cast a glance at her. But Daiyu was so nervous lest she should have to pay a forfeit that she did not so much as notice her. In the middle there's the color of the embroidered screen, 10 spots, 4 and 6, is beautiful, Yüan-yang proceeded. Not Yin Hung Niang to the gauze window comes, any message to bring, Daiyu responded. There now remains a 2 and 6, 8 in all, Yüan-yang resumed. Twice see the jade throne when led in to perform the court ritual, Daiyu replied. Together they form a basket suitable for putting plucked flowers in, Yüan-yang continued. The fairy wand smells nice as on it hangs a peony, Daiyu retorted. At the close of her replies, she took a sip of wine. Yüan-yang then resumed. On the left, she said, there's a 4 and 5, making a different combined 9. The peach blossoms bear heavy drops of rain, Ying-chun remarked. The company laughed. She must be fined, they exclaimed. She has made a mistake in the rhyme. Besides, it isn't right. Ying-chun smiled and drank a sip. The fact is that both Lady Feng and Yüan-yang were so eager to hear the funny things that would be uttered by old goody Liu, that they with one voice purposely ruled that everyone answered wrong and fined them. When it came to Madame Wang's turn, Yüan-yang recited something for her. Next followed old goody Liu. When we country people have got nothing to do, old goody Liu said, a few of us too often come together and play this sort of game, but the answers we give are not so high-flown. Yet, as I can't get out of it, I'll likewise make a try. It's easy enough to say what there is, one and all laughed. So, just you go on and don't mind. On the left, Yüan-yang smiled. There's a double 4, i.e. a man. Goody listened intently. After considerable reflection, "It's a peasant!" she cried. One and all in the room blurted out laughing. "Well said." Dowager Lady Chia observed with a laugh. "That's the way. All we country people know," old Goody Liu proceeded, also laughing, "is just what comes within our own rough and ready wits, so young ladies and ladies, pray don't poke fun at me. In the center there's the 3 and 4, green matched with red," Yüan-yang pursued. "The large fire burnt the hairy caterpillar." Old Goody Liu ventured. "This will do very well." The party laughed. "Go on with what is in your line." On the right, Yüan-yang smilingly continued. "There's a 1 and 4, and is really pretty. A turnip and a head of garlic," old Goody Liu answered. This reply evoked further laughter from the whole company. "Altogether, it's a twig of flowers," Yüan-yang added, laughing. The flower dropped and a huge melon formed, old Goody Liu observed, while gesticulating with both her hands by way of illustration. The party once more exploded in loud merriment. But, reader, if you entertain any curiosity to hear what else was said during the banquet, listen to the explanation given in the next chapter.
Thanks for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more excellent content.